Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pilipinx in Wellness podcast. This is Cheryl Samson Ramirez co-hosting this special episode with Sheena Katz. A word on this episode, I'd like to start with a disclaimer that this material that we will be discussing may be sensitive for many. We will be talking about grief, loss, dying, and death. So please make sure to take pauses and for your own wellness and any emotions that may surface while listening or watching. I am happy to introduce our guests, Michelle Mondia, Death Midwife, and Minda Sanchez, Death Doula, to talk to us about dying, or better said, living with dignity. How can we help our loved ones navigate through their end-of-life transitions and also reflect on ways to communicate our own wishes when it comes to our own end of life? All this and more as we unpack this in episode 8 of season 4. We hope that you enjoy this episode. Maayong adlaw, welcome to episode 8 of season 4 for the Pilipinx in Wellness podcast. I am your host, Cheryl Samson Ramirez, and my pronouns are she, her, sha. For this episode's audio description, currently I am wearing a purple malong with designs to represent that we're recording on Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'd like to center the Indigenous people from my parents' lineage, the Subanon and the Eta people from both my mother and father's side, respectively, and also the Tongva and Kizh people whose land that I'm currently recording on. I also wanted to continue with my audio description, mentioning that I have silver headphones that rest over my ears. I have a black top underneath my malong and a white background. For this episode, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Sheena Katz.
Hello, everybody. This is Sheena Katz, and my pronouns are she and her. For my audio description, currently I'm wearing a black top with a blue button-up sweater. My hair is down. I have some gold hoop earrings on, per usual, and I'm seated in front of an impressionist painting behind me. So following our last episode, Cultural Perspective on Wellness with K. Virgil Mayor Apostol, this month, we will be talking about dying with dignity with Death Midwife and Death Doula, Michelle Mondia and Minda Sanchez.
As mentioned in previous episodes, all views discussed are for informational and educational purposes only. It's not meant to be medical advice, nor does it constitute therapy or professional advice. Always consult with your healthcare practitioner, especially before starting any exercise or new health program, or a qualified mental health professional for your particular condition. This will be a sensitive topic for our community as we talk about grief, dying, death, and loss with our guests. As needed, please feel free to pause throughout the episode to take care of yourself. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome to our podcast, Michelle and Minda. Welcome to the Pilipinx in Wellness podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here.
Welcome. This is Sheena. So we typically like to open our episodes by getting to know our guests and their origins. So Minda and Michelle, to your knowledge, where are both sides of your families from in the Philippines, and where are you both streaming from today?
Yeah, first of all, magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang gabi, wherever you are in this world. My name is Michelle Mondia. My family is from Luzon and Visayas. On my maternal side, I come from the Inta tribes of Tarlac, as well as Aklan, which is in Western Visaya. And on my father's side, I hail from Negros Occidental, specifically from Bacolod. So that's where I came from, and currently calling in from the unceded territory of the Tongvas Gabrielino tribes here in Southern California. And perhaps I'm going backwards. Pronouns she, her. And for an audio description, I am wearing a white shirt. On top of that is a light brown cardigan, and behind me is a white wall. I'm wearing glasses, and my short hair is tied back, and wearing just not as big of a hoop earrings as Sheena, but some small earrings, gold earrings. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Minda Sanchez. My whole name is Lucy Minda. I'm wearing a magenta sweater with a gold necklace. I have long wavy hair and a gray background. I have some white headphones that I'm wearing today. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people in the area of Boston, area known as Boston. My family comes from, my father comes from Cebu in the Visayas region, and my mother is from Davao in Mindanao.
Very cool. So let's actually start with defining your roles when it comes to supporting people with their end-of-life transition. So Michelle, you identify as a death midwife, and Minda, you as a death doula. Can you explain the difference between the two for our audience and for us as well?
Yeah, I can get started. First of all, just the term death doula and death midwives are still pretty novel terms, even here in the United States. But you'll most often hear death doulas. And for those of you all who are familiar with birth midwives and birth doulas, right, there's also in some ways a distinction. So as a death midwife, it pretty much encompasses the spectrum of end-of-life work, from creating advanced care directive all the way to assisting families and their loved ones through the final disposition. And in between that, we definitely offer the non-medical, emotional, spiritual support for the loved ones and those who are dying. Very hands-on. So in my work, my specialty is actually home funerals. And so my work educate and support families with bringing their loved ones home and having a 3-day vigil or however long they feel that they need, and anointing, shrouding, washing, and all of the rituals involved. So very hands-on.
I would have to agree with
Linda for her.
Yeah, and I will have to agree with all of what Michelle said. A death doula and a death midwife, functionally, there's not a lot of difference from the advanced preparation, from getting your paperwork in order, getting your, creating your end-of-life plans, your wishes, facilitating communication about your wishes, facilitating conversations with the families and with some of their medical or their care teams. All of that is included in an end-of-life doula, an end-of-life planner, a death doula. One thing about a death midwife I think that is different is more of that hands-on care that Michelle talked about. All doulas will provide some practical, non-medical support, emotional, spiritual support for the dying person and their families. The death midwife tends to be more hands-on and does more of that funeral element and the funeral celebrant element, especially the home funerals and the home celebrant roles. So that's a little bit of a distinguishing factor between doulas and midwives. But functionally, we're there in similar ways to provide holistic support for the dying person and their family and their loved ones, and a different, just kind of a holistic version of like what family means to the dying person.
That's super helpful. And now I know that while we are a global podcast, since you're both currently based in the U.S., can you talk a little bit more about the current landscape that you've seen with death and dying in the U.S. right now?
I can take a stab at it. The current landscape in the U.S., wow, it's so... The death positive movement and the changing the narrative and practice around end of life has really starting to take form in the last 5 years. So I would describe it, at least in the work that we do, as I'm not even going to say alternative, even though some people may call it alternative, but definitely moving away from what we normally think of in end of life planning and end of life care. The past 5 years has really it's blossomed into just a variety of practices all across the United States. You have practitioners who are engaged in this work. And so there's a conversation happening. In fact, I just came from Seattle where I toured and attended a conversation around human composting, because right now that's legal in 12 states, California being one of them. And so it's a really fast movement. In the past 4 or 5 years, it went from 1 state to 12 states. And so in that sense, the current landscape of how Minda and I approach death, it's exciting because I think there's a lot more people who are trying to understand what else there is as a way to really hold grief and loss and end of life. Because for many of us, suffering continues and to exist, and we don't know where to place it in our current landscape. So I'm really excited to be part of this movement. And I don't know, Minda, I think, it's so different because you're from the East Coast. I'm in the West Coast. So I don't know what that feels like for you in the East Coast as a doula.
It's exciting to be part of this kind of Wild West movement. There's so many new things that are coming up in terms of services and approaches. And when I say new, there's a lot of return to the old, like green burials, how we used to bury our dead before. It's a new and exciting thing, and new people are creating more spaces, but it really is a return to traditional practices. We think about traditional in the U.S. funeral industry. That's like a cemetery and getting buried in a concrete in a box in a concrete box in the cemetery, and it's and getting embalmed and all that, and that's not necessarily traditional. It's what's seen as traditional in the U.S., but what we're seeing now is a movement to other ways, like returning to the earth, and human composting, or various aquamation and other types of funeral practices. Also, more and more people are requesting to die at home, which is an exciting thing, and also is going to help with this silver tsunami of people who are aging right now in the United States and all over the world. When you think about the baby boomer population and the what do you call it, the silent generation, all of them aging, you've got this massive, I think it's like within the next 10 years or so, you're going to have like 30% of the population over the age of 65 or 70. And these people are going to be dying in mass, not in mass, but just there's a lot of them, and they're going to go through the healthcare system. And if they continue dying in the ways that they are, overcrowding the ICUs and dying in hospitals, we're going to see a massive problem in our healthcare system and overtaxing of our economy, actually. And so if more and more people die at home in the care of their families and in their communities, I will have to say it could save our economy for future generations and not bankrupt our economy, which is the trend. If we continue dying in the way that we are in the United States, we risk bankrupting our economy. And so we're part of a movement to help bring back death to the homes, back to the earth, and return to more natural and communal ways of caring for each other and dying naturally.
I'll just a bit of a follow. First of all, it's so it tickled me to your description of a silver tsunami. I guess I belong to that group now. But one of the things I also wanted to just mention is also the lack of people of color who are practicing in this industry, right? I trained many, many years ago, over a decade. And to this day, I will say, even though there's been some changes, those who are training us and those who are in the training programs are primarily older white women. And so I'm enthusiastic, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Deaf Workers Alliance that I've gaining momentum around organizing and providing support for people of color who are very much already doing this work. It's nothing new for a lot of us sometimes, all these practices that you'll hear that Minda and I will talk about during this podcast. And that's why it was hard for me to say that this is an alternative, because it's not. We're just going back to something that we've forgotten.
So Michelle and Minda, you've both mentioned some things that I'd like to just further clarify for our community. Michelle, you were mentioning human compost, and Minda, you were also mentioning green burials and aquamation. For most people, they're more familiar with burials and cremations. Can you explain to us what are the other ways that we can explore when it comes to this stage in our life? And either Minda and Michelle, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, there's just so many options. I think that's one of the things that surprises people that I work with, not actually knowing around just all these various practices. So yes, you do have your kind of in-ground burial that we know about, and cremation. So human composting, if you're kind of a gardener or anything, if you or not, and you know about what composting is, it's really turning our bodies into something that is that we're biodegradable, and we use that compost after 30 days of being in the vessel, just as like you would when you compost food in the kitchen, all these organic materials. And so we add all of the pretty much similar materials, organic materials, and a little bit of non-organic, but primarily organic materials, and our body breaks down. I mean, surprise, we're a natural being. And so after about 30 to 45 days, the family can get up to 40 bags of compost. That includes like alfalfa, straws, and other elements as well. And they may opt to take all of the bags or none, or just a little bit for their garden or whatever ceremonies they want to do with that. But, it's essentially just making use of something that is very nutrient rich and bringing it back to the source, the earth, the soil. So that's what human composting is. And like I mentioned, it is legal in California. We do not have the infrastructure for it yet. That's part of the work that I'm hoping to do, is to push and support that initiative. Currently, couple of organizations that I work with and companies, we do transport the body to the closest is Las Vegas, where there is an infrastructure. But in the past, I will ship the body to Oregon, where Recompose is, and that's where the magic happens. It is magic because it's alchemy. It's turning something into gold. So that's what it is in this.
Yeah. And
I know Minda's it's part of the green burial, right, Minda?
Right. Yeah. So green burial, like that's how I want to die, in a green burial. Really simply, just bury me like in a simple shroud, in a cotton shroud that's biodegradable and friendly to the earth, and bury me about 3 feet under, so that I can decompose naturally, not too deep, but like about 3 feet is where you can decompose best. And that's the cheap, a really simple, inexpensive, very natural way for your body to decompose, to become compost. and to fertilize the ground. We have such a richness in our body that we can, grow things from, grow food, grow trees, and I think before when in an old practice, like people used to move around, like tribes would move and, bury their bodies and maybe move to a different region or whatever, depending on the seasons and where the land might take them and life might take them. But you could always tell where they were from because the land, it's like where it was most lush. And because the land was most fertile where the bodies and the bones were buried. Anyways, it's just like returning to some older practices that people used to do and how our bodies used to nourish the earth. And so there are more places that are offering these green burial grounds. There's still, and some even traditional funeral places will offer some green burials. They're expensive right now, but we're hoping that might change in the future. One also alternative that I talked about was aquamation, which is an alternative to cremation, where cremation uses fire to break down a body. Aquamation uses water. It uses heat, pressure, water, and lye to break down the organic materials in a body in a cylinder at a facility, and then the remaining material is basically bones, and that the bones are pulverized to make like an ash-like substance that can be put in an urn and given to the family and used as ashes are. But it is a lot more eco-friendly because you don't have all of the carbon being released from this fire, and it's just using water and natural materials, more eco-friendly alternative to cremation is aquamation. It's not offered in many places. And Michelle, do you know where you could get aquamation?
I don't, but it's, I would say more than 12, more than human composting in terms the number of states in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is
part of legal here in California.
Part of this Wild West of new things that are coming up, giving people alternatives. And it's exciting, again, to be part of this movement to create more alternatives for dying the way you'd like, dying with dignity, as this podcast name suggests.
I also just want to add a couple more options for our listeners. And one of them is seed burial. Minda talked about green burial as her final disposition, and seed burial would be something that I would choose for myself, which is, shrouding somebody. And here in California anyways, in Southern California specifically, there are organizations that would carry the body and their loved ones being followed by another kind of boat or catamaran, depending, into a regulated, approved area in the ocean. And what we normally do is shroud the body and lay you, and obviously tie something that's heavy and bring you down. And so you pretty much, it's the same way in terms of green burial, not into the soil but into sea life. So that's another option as well. I would say there are Viking end of life. I've had one ask me if I could support them, but it is also being cremated, but their ashes going into some kind of a big firework show, and so that's a Viking send off. So there's just
wow.
Yeah, and I'll just point this out to what Minda was saying around that this is the Wild Wild West. It is exciting, but for me, I'm also cautious around who gets to protect such a sacred rituals, and who gets to be there to support families. That's an important question for me as we're engaging in this movement. So I just want to point that out for our listeners who are thinking about wanting to do this work.
So this is Cheryl speaking and coming back in. Now that our community has heard all the different types of burials that you've mentioned, and I'm sure there's more out there that have not been even mentioned. But for the gist of it, like, how would one go about pursuing any one of these types of burials that you've mentioned outside of the burial in the ground and cremation? if this is something that they are interested in exploring, where would they start?
Where would they start? I mean, definitely the funeral industry, the funeral homes are beginning to catch on some of these options that we have. And at least for those that I've worked with that are very much in support of some of these options, they would know. So if you're Googling, let's say, if somebody is close to dying or have died, and you're like funeral homes, you can definitely type up alternative funeral homes, and they may be able to support you in wherever you are. You know, depending on the state, you might be in a rural part of California or wherever, and that may be a little harder to do, right? And there will be very limited options. With just even reaching out to end-of-life doulas, we are in every state. And so that's a place to start as well.
And start early. And I think that that's a big thing, even just to know your options in your area. Like, I can't speak to what options are going to be available to anyone around the world, to any of your podcast listeners, right? So you need to know what is available to you in your area, unless you want to be shipped somewhere, you know, and that's also an option. But it's like understanding your budget, what you want, what are the options near you, who would you like to be there? Who do you want to give this sacred responsibility to? All of these things need to be factored in, and you need to have these conversations with your loved ones far in advance so that you can get what you want, right? So I think that's the first step, is like exploring for yourself and having some conversations, some exploratory conversations. And if there are around you, an end-of-life doula or someone who could help you to understand your options and help you create these plans. And that's something that we do, end-of-life planning and doing some research on your options. We may not know all of the options in your area, but we could help and partner with you to figure out what's available to you within your budget, you know, what's agreeable to your family. We could help facilitate these conversations, and that's something that we could do to help you get started.
And I'm glad that you mentioned also the option of maybe, unless people want to be sent somewhere else or shipped, right? Because especially for a diasporic community that we are a part of, sometimes people also have plots overseas, right? And so those are also considerations to explore when we're getting closer or nearing the end of a life journey. So now that we've defined and distinguished your roles for our community, let's start with your origin stories. I'm sure people are curious to know how you ended up doing this work. What were the events that took place, or who were the individuals that inspired you both to assist others with their end of life journeys? And Minda, why don't we start with you on this one?
So in 2019, I had the distinct pleasure of assisting my mom in her end-of-life journey, being her primary care provider in her time at home, in hospice at home. And it was a transformative experience for me, and I call it a human-making experience for me. It was really part of my growing up and becoming more fully formed human. And I think it was a gift for her to invite me to be part of her journey, to allow me into that space, and to confide in me, like her wishes, and to allow me to accompany her in that journey. So that transformative experience, life affirming, eye-opening, helping me to see the preciousness of life, helping me to see myself and the role that I could provide to other people to reduce their suffering and help them to journey into a more peaceful transition. All of that was really inspired me. The main thing for me in helping my mom through her journey was that I was wondering why it was so hard and why I didn't know how to do it well, right? And I was looking for support, and I couldn't see that in my elders and other people around me who were more denying what was happening to my mom and wanting to continue feeding her or giving her oxygen or trying to prevent what was obvious to my mom, what was happening to her, what she was already accepting that was happening to her, what we were talking about, me and her, but what was happening and what we were preparing for, and other people around not accepting it, resisting it. And it brought more suffering to her end of life, to have this resistance and to not be able to have the conversations and to be supported in this transition. And so I wanted to be someone who could help people make it easier at this end of life. Death shouldn't be so, it is mysterious, yes, but it's not so unknowable. We've been doing the death thing since we've been living, since humans have been in existence. It should be something that we're familiar with, that maybe some people could coach us through, that it is a knowable thing that we can consciously do, not just something that happens to us, but something that we can plan for, that we can be mindful of, that we can approach with intention, that we can get support around, and that we can approach more peacefully. And not everyone's going to have a peaceful death, but we could provide some space for it to be possible for folks.
And thank you, Minda, for sharing that. It was really your mom's experience that brought you into this work. How was it for you, Michelle?
For me, well, I grew up in the Philippines. And so my exposure to end of life, grieving, mourning, death, and loss was somewhat of a contrast when it came here to the United States, where I feel that my experience of it growing up with my relatives were much more community-focused and community-driven. And so experiencing death of loved ones and friends here in the United States, it felt very isolating. And, I think any time I'm curious or wanting to learn something, I ask the questions like, why is that? And so that was just sitting with me. I came here when I was 15, and before I left the Philippines, my cousin Cheryl had died from leukemia, and we were like soul sisters. And so that impacted me in a way that I think I started my end of life work in pediatric hospice. And I know that my experience with that, with her death, led to my initiation into the work. And but it was really fortified that this is something that I want to engage in, the path. When I gave birth to both of my kids, their home births. And so I was assisted by doulas and midwives. And so when contemplating the other spectrum of life and death is part of life, I began to ask the question, why don't we have a similar experience and practice and framework around end of life? Where is my spiritual doula or my midwife to assist us in this transition? Birth to me is, obviously the birth into the physical life, but death can also be the birth into the spiritual life. So on both ends, we are midwiferying these transitions, right? And so having that experience with both of my children really clarified for me the path that I want to take on. And my work has really been influenced a lot by not only my experience and my culture as Filipinos, and also weaving in the experience of immigrating here. And you talked about diaspora, right? And so what does that look like in terms of me bringing in my practice and studies in anthroposophy and in Zotusen Buddhism, for example, as well as a lot of the indigenous cultures here in the United States that have influenced and continue to really provide support for me in this work. So just a lot of different threads, but in the end, I think for me, I sit in this precipice of this work and in this movement with wanting to be of service by way of allowing us to look at suffering and turning towards suffering. And to me, that is the core of my ethos, really, as a death midwife, is to support each other and guide each other into facing what is really, really difficult, right? What can be really, really tabooed and dark. But from my experience personally and professionally, when you do look at suffering, like the end of life with someone who has died, and trust me, being in the hospital, being, a witness to parents who's holding their child who has just died, it's immense. You can't describe it in words. How do you then use that and continue to honor life and continue to move through that suffering? So for me, there's just a lot of these, different threads, and I'm grateful to be open to listening to the calling.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, you were saying the study of what is the name of this work?
Anthroposophy. So my children...
I'm sorry, can you spell that?
Yeah, anthroposophy. Okay. It's not a religion, it's a practice. And it comes from really... My children went to Waldorf schools.
Okay.
That's just an educational pedagogy, is a very specific one. And so, again, and that is really for me, the weaving in the human experience in the spiritual life. So that was an important part of my initiation, if you will.
Thank you. This is Cheryl coming in again. And to each of you, just moving through and experiencing what you both have or are experiencing in the work that you do, that we've titled this particular episode Dying with Dignity. And Michelle, you were just mentioning working for a pediatrics and assisting parents with their own children's end of life. But I'm sure that you all have had various experiences through different ages that you've supported. Now, when it comes to tying it back in with dying with dignity, what does that mean to each of you? And Michelle, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, that phrase says something. It's come to my consciousness, and the way that I really think about that is respect for someone's wishes and how they want to go, where they want to go, and even to the point of what music they want to play, who's around them at the end of life. The second is reclaiming something that we've forgotten as people, which is attending to our own death and attending to our loved ones, and really reclaiming that by way of resisting. The funeral industry is a $23 billion industry, and it's growing. And so we have for so long now outsourced this very sacred part of life to an industry that's often impersonal, expensive, and trivial. And not to demonize the funeral industry, because I know that in other cultures that's also an important part of their community. But I think that there must be a way to be inclusive of all the other things that we are looking to in order to support our own process. And so for me, dying with dignity lies at the intersection of so many injustices: economic, health, racial justice, and indigenous justice, right? So all of that is interwoven, and to be able to die with dignity is to have respect, to reclaim something that we've known and we've forgotten, and to resist.
How about for you, Minda? What does this title represent for you doing this work and coming into it?
Well, I just want to acknowledge that often in a modern American language or conversation, death with dignity is often associated with medical aid in dying, or physician-assisted suicide, as it also can be known as. That's not what it means to me. For me, the title of this podcast is, like Michelle said, reclaiming and she used the word reclaiming, and I'm going to say reclaiming the dignity of death itself. Dying is not an evil thing. It's not something to be ashamed of, as if it's a human failure or a technological failure or a medical failure. It's a dignified transition, a process, a human, mortal, sacred experience. It is dignified. So for me, it's reclaiming death too, just as a dignified phenomena, right? And reclaiming, what we have known in our bones how to do, and how to care for each other, right? Instead of outsourcing it to other people because it's too scary, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not qualified. So reclaiming death and the dignity of all of us to participate in this sacred passage and to be able to support our own in this transition, and also to talk about it as not a taboo, scary, evil or shameful thing, but as something that is dignified in and of itself, and a respectful conversation. It's not these are not bad words. So, and also to die is an act. It is not something that just happens to you. It's not a passive thing. It's actually something that you do. What's a passive form of to die? To be killed, right? And is that what we do at the end? We're just killed by whatever situation or disease takes us. To die with dignity means to do something with intention, that an act that you're actually submitting to, that you're engaging in, that you're participating in, that you are, that you're doing. It's an act. And so reclaiming that as something that you do, and it is a dignified thing. So, and you could even see it, and some people might even see it as death as like a deity in itself, and to submit to this like sacred thing, So there's reclaiming that as well.
Examples of what this can look like with a couple of families and loved ones that I've assisted. One of them, for example, that Minda had mentioned, MAID, medically aid in dying. Not the same as attempted assisted suicide. It's a very subtle difference, but people oftentimes think that's interchangeable, but it's not. And so I had somebody else who developed ALS. He was very active. He was in his 70s. He developed ALS, and
you can define what ALS is, just in case.
Gosh, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But it's a medical condition like I believe Lou Gehrig's. Lou Gehrig.
Okay.
So where in the past has been a very active, social, robust. He was leading that kind of a lifestyle, and all of a sudden he's hit with ALS, and he's bedridden. Even going to the bathroom, he needed assistance, and he ended up being really in a very fetal position because his bodies and his muscles have just stopped working, really. And he said, I am in so much pain, and I know I will be in even more pain as time goes on. And he opted for MAID. So for him, that is dying with dignity. I know other people may not see it as such. In fact, his son did not want to attend that last. So when you go through MAID, you're given medicine by hospice nurse, or if you're not in hospice, in the hospital, you're given 2 doses of medication. But as death doulas and midwives, we're not allowed to administer that. We're allowed to be there for the parents and loved ones emotionally and mentally as they're going through that, because you're basically putting in your calendar when you're going to die, right? It's scheduling that. And so for him, that's dying with dignity. And I also want to mention VSED, the voluntary stopping of eating and dying. It's another way that somebody eating and drinking, sorry. Another way that, thank you, Minda, another way that people have opted to do that. And so I remember supporting somebody going through that. And he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He received his family's blessing to do that. And so for 2 weeks, he stopped eating, primarily stopped eating, maybe a tablespoon of water. That's all he took. And for him to die with dignity means that he can experience the death of his organs. I remember visiting him and he would say, I think today I'm going to say goodbye to my liver today. And so he was very awake to everything that he was experiencing through that process and through that journey. And again, for him, that is dying with dignity. Fathers may look very just different. So that's how I think people really, I think that's the work that we're doing, is allowing people to have these choices. But in order for them to even understand what the choices are, it's really having some introspection. You die is how you live, for some people would say. So when you are close to or nearing that process, or even not, to begin to think about death is really just thinking about life. It's the same side of, different side, same coin, just different side. And so for me in this work is, a lot of people would ask me, and maybe you as well, Minda, like, how can you do this work? This is so depressing. And this is just, just sad to be in this space. But for me, there's so much life at the end of life, even not, because you also get to experience family dynamics that come alive. It may look good, it may look bad, but nonetheless, there's this life that's coming up. And so those I just wanted to point out a couple of experiences that I have that really exemplifies what dying with dignity can look like for people.
The dignity of your body shutting down. Can we dignify your body shutting down and allowing it to shut down as it is and to say goodbye? And is that dignified to say goodbye? Can we just reclaim that? So, yeah. And I have to echo Michelle saying that there is so much life that can happen around death. And for me, dying people kind of hold up a mirror to your life, to help you appreciate just like this breath that you can take in. At the end of life, you can hunger for that breath, just that ability to hold air in your lungs and to breathe it out. And it's like, just that. It's like how beautiful that is. Like, and to savor that, and it's just like, oh, it's so beautiful. And to be able to stand up and to take a step and to go outside, to see a blue sky and to like hug people, all of these things, that just comes alive for me when I'm with a dying person and I can see what they miss, what they're saying goodbye to, all the parts of their body that they're grieving and they're saying goodbye to. And I'm like, wow, look at this. Look how beautiful I am. Look how beautiful this life is. And oftentimes for me, it connects people because dying and death just brings out vulnerability in folks. And that just breaks us open for connection and for remembering our humanity and for how to take care of each other and hold each other and to say, yeah, me too, I hurt. And yeah, I need you too. And it helps us to see ourselves, our mirror, the preciousness of every breath in our life. And it helps us reconnect, like what's important to us. When you're with a dying person and you hear and you listen to their stories of what matters most, the stories are so much about the experience that they've had with people and with nature and their relationships with folks. And that just reminds us, like, how do we live? How do I live so that I die well, right? And a lot of times it's like, how do we connect? How do we relate to each other? How do we care for each other? And it helps people like reconnect as family members, as community. It helps to remind us who our people are. And if we don't have people, maybe we should go out and get and make these connections. And how? By like supporting people. So all of these things come alive for me when I'm at the bedside with folks, and how I appreciate my skin, my hair, just my breath, my steps. And then I think about all the beautiful people in my life and, and the importance of loving them. All of these things come up for me. And then at their funerals, and how all the love that gets spoken about when we remember our experiences with them, and like who we are in relationship to each other. All of these things come up at these celebrations of life, right? All the love and like what's important, what's meaningful, who we should be with each other. It's just like so life affirming. And so, yeah, I get excited about it. And for me, it's just so, it fills me with a love, just like a love of life, a love of my life, and just like to be able to see beauty wherever I go. And death. Mm-hmm. I see beauty and death wherever I go. It's fall here in New England, and I see these gorgeous yellow and red and orange, trees and, transitioning, and the leaves falling. And if this leaf that fell from this tree, did it have any meaning among the billions of leaves falling? Yes, its life had meaning, and in its dying and in its death, it nourishes the earth, and it feeds through its life. It feeds the tree, and through its death, it also feeds the soil. And so, when I walk into the world as a death doula, I see the death and I see the beauty in the life. And I don't think I would be able to see the world in this way if I didn't have a direct experience with death and dying and grief.
And I will just say this. I don't know if this is your experience, Minda, but every time I'm like in some kind of a gathering collective and I get excited about some of these things. It's often the topic that nobody wants to talk about. So, we don't mean to get too excited about it, but it's exciting when we are with fellow death doulas and midwives because of just I think of what Minda was saying about how life affirming it is. And so we're hoping in our roles to support end of life, but it's really supporting life in general.
Amen, sister.
This is Cheryl coming back in. There's just so many thoughts and gems with what you both have just said. Just the passion that stands out when you're talking around this work is really clear and transparent as you're speaking about your roles really with our communities. I was also thinking about, as you were speaking, also sometimes the contention that arises. I know I've also seen it in families, especially starting maybe even as early as talking about advance directives, right? And when we fill out advance directives, sometimes we opt for something, but it's really our loved ones at times that don't want to let us go, and even if that's against our wishes, making decisions that like don't always go with how we personally choose or want. But also just the way that you both honor life in the process, and the way that you talk about nature being it's our teacher in all of this, and just seeing like stepping outside and the smells, the sights, and how it teaches us the natural cycle of life. So there's just so many things and segues that came out of from what you just said. But I want to bring it back to really making helping our community understand and unpacking the work that you both do on the daily. So when it comes to considering to honor the lives of our loved ones, to aid them in this process, what are some different elements that we can consider when it comes to preparing for their end-of-life journeys? And for this one, why don't we start with Minda first, and then Michelle to follow.
Okay, I just want to repeat the question. What are some elements that we should consider in preparing for our end-of-life journeys?
Right, yeah. So when it comes to what you both do in your work, how do you help prepare people when it comes to supporting their loved ones in their end-of-life journeys? What does that look like? What are the different elements that take place in the work that you do? Maybe, I don't know if it would be best to talk about it step by step, or in the process, what are those elements that you bring in?
It really depends on where people are in their journey, because people come in like healthy and you just want to get ahead of the process, and you don't want to get to the end of your life, because it can happen anytime. And so you might want to just get ahead of things and get your affairs in order. And maybe that's just, for me, I might just help you get the paperwork in order, make sure give you a checklist of things to do in terms of your will and your advanced care directive, and knowing where all of your bank accounts and passwords and stuff are, so that you know this. And then writing letters to people, like, in case, if you find this, I might have died suddenly, and these are some things that I want you to know, and I love you, and thank you, I forgive you. These are some cherished memories, and goodbye. And helping people write letters like that. Maybe it's and so it could be doing things at a conceptual level as a healthy person. It could be, when people are facing a terminal illness. And so that's a different conversation, and a different conversation with the family about what is it that we want, seriously, for real, at the end of life? What might that look like? What does that space look like? And it might be doing a little meditation exercise with the dying person to help them kind of imagine what that experience would look and feel like for them, and to help them see what will be happening to their body, and then imagine themselves through the whole journey. And then upon reflection of that, what are the elements that they want? And for us, it's really about facilitating a conversation. We're not experts at any one thing, but we're mainly here to provide companionship and facilitate conversations, and to help people, think about what they want, and support them in moving through their wishes. Michelle, what are some of your ideas on this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, having advanced care directive or an end of life folder is where I would start with. And oftentimes I get calls from can you help me create my end of life plan, all the way to my mom just died. What do I need to do? So it varies for me. But I think for me, the very onset is just having a conversation with your loved ones around some of the end of life planning that you'd like to see. And that conversation can feel very logistics and really, this is what I want to wear, and this is where I want to be buried, and these are my passwords. But at the end of the day, it's also, I think Sheena had mentioned this relationship building, this community building. So you'd be surprised what comes through through those conversations. So really having conversations, as Filipinos, sometimes you often hear, bahala ka na. You'll ask your parents, and your parents will tell you, you can do whatever you want with my body. Bahala ka na. It's up to you. And it's really, for some of us, when we receive that, it feels like, thank you for the trust, but it's a burden. I don't know where to start. If you can just help guide me. So for our elders who are listening out there, saying that is one thing, but also supporting your loved ones in what you may want to have, your wishes. And if you don't have any, and at least have a conversation around a legacy, or even sharing your stories around with your loved ones. But essentially it boils down to conversation, and because I find when how helpful that is at the end of life, when I come into a family situation and you either have a lot of things already noted and notarized and also just written down, it makes a lot of things easier for a family. Versus if you don't, it can really take away from the space of you grieving from the space of you just taking in this enormity of somebody dying that you love so much, right? And now you have to do paperwork and you figure out who to call. And so it just, let's start from there. And I would even advise for yourself, for your individual work is to, I know this may sound morbid, but exercise of imagining your own death. And, there's this big death, right? The big D in the end of life, but there are numerous ways of grieving and dying. Every day our cells die, they regenerate. So even then, constantly we are dying in some ways, small d. But let's also not forget about the different losses that we experience, whether it be relationships, whether it be jobs, and even for us in the diaspora, grieving the loss of language, grieving the loss of some of these cultural practices that we wish we still have, grieving the fact that we're so far away from our homeland, right? So there are these immense grief that we can begin to befriend and begin to really face. And from there, the big D is almost like, oh, okay, I can deal with that, I think, But yes, that there's, it's similar to what Minda was saying. Preparation helps.
Preparation.
Really, the essence is about building relationships. Yeah.
And this is a really fruitful conversation in the direction where we're actually unpacking now your work, and we really genuinely know and understand what does it mean for our community to die with dignity. Now, we also engaged our community over social media and asked them if they had any questions for you both. And we got one from Abigail, handle at abby.gailpdazzo from Riverside County, who wanted to ask you both how to maintain boundaries or create boundaries around grieving for those that are either younger or older than you. So that was pretty much the question that we got. I don't know if any of you might want to take it from here and start with that question from Abigail.
Well, I guess I'll take a stab. So thinking about boundaries and the purpose of boundaries. Your boundaries are not to push away, but mainly protect yourself and to honor yourself, your own feelings, your own needs. And from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective, from a spiritual perspective, protecting yourself and caring for yourself, right? So I think the first step in that is understanding your own feelings, and what are the underlying needs that are beneath those feelings. So that I would start there. How are you feeling? And I think we, as a culture in America, we're not good at this, articulating how we feel. Like, I feel bad. Can we go, more than that, beyond that? I feel sad. I feel despondent. I ache. I'm longing for connection. Whatever your feelings are, how can we be more in touch with that? How can we be curious and aware of that? And then how can we articulate that to other people and say, this is how I'm feeling. I need a little space right now. I need to step away. And allowing ourselves to care for ourselves, maybe say no sometimes, or even ask for what we need. And so ask for help. So I think that's a start. And I think that for with younger people or with older people or with anybody, starting with awareness of your own feelings, what's happening in your body, what you need physically, emotionally, and being able to communicate that out in safe, kind ways too. It's not about pushing people away. It's about honoring yourself. That's a start.
Absolutely. I agree with everything Minda just said. And I would say too, grieving is, there's no two alike. Grieving is such an individual experience. So even within the family, learning how to honor other people's process, and also honoring your own, and not having this expectation that everybody should grieve the same way. Oh my God, you didn't cry at Lola's funeral. How dare you? You're the worst, So there are some of these cultural expectations also that I do want to touch on, right? As Filipinos, we for the good and the bad, we tend to lean to our communities and end of life as well, and practicing some of those rituals, both like family rituals, and Philippines is so diverse, so regional practices could support you in that. But to Minda's point about it's a very individualized experience, and you do what you need to do to process your grief, and while allowing others to process theirs in their own way.
Amen.
So this is Sheena coming back in. So for our Filipino community, we launched this episode intentionally to follow Araw ng mga Patay, which translates to All Saints Day or Day of the Dead. Can you share more about some of the traditions that are practiced in the Philippines or throughout our community when someone is dying or has died? Let's start with Michelle.
Yeah, as I said, I mentioned I was raised in the Philippines, so luckily I was able to really have those practices still in the work that I do. But the Philippines is so diverse, right? I mean, thousands of islands from the north to the south, and also primarily Catholic, but we definitely have a very robust Muslim community in the south, and also a lot of the other religious practices in the Philippines. And so there's no monolithic practice, but I will share a few things that I think are just gems that for me, as I was doing my research, and some of the things that we don't do here anymore. And primarily, we're as a diaspora, we're not in our homeland. It's a different context, different land, but I will share a few things. So, for example, pre-colonialism, right? We have so many rich cultures. In the Manobos tribe in the south, for example, they bury their death. They hollow a tree and they bury your loved ones in that hollowed tree with likha. Likha is like a deity. So if you see it's a carving of a wooden figure, and you place that with your loved ones. So that's their way of honoring their loved ones, and it's a way of making sure that you are guided through your journey. The Ifugaos, right? They seat the corpse in a chair before they bury it in the cave or elsewhere. But they also practice this thing called bugwa, which is akin to what we do here, Minda, around anointing and shrouding. So we've had that practices for a very long time. Mummification in Benguet. There's so many, but I'm just gonna mention a few more because I just love these practices. In the Benguet region in the north, you have the mummification of dehydrating the body, the corpse. For 9 days, they even blindfold their dead and they sit them on the chairs, and the elders chant these beautiful chants. And the chant is around the biography of the person who had just died. Wow. And so hopefully as they are chanting, and again, you see this in Tibet Buddhism, where 49 days of chanting by the body, we have that in kind of traditional indigenous practice of chanting to support the loved ones through their journey as well. And there's so many pre-colonial beautiful rituals and ceremonies that we have that we can do here. And of course, you have, the Catholicism and the 9 days, then the 40 days, and all of that that entails in the Catholic religion. I think a lot of our listeners are probably some of the common ones are, I remember somebody was telling me the story about when somebody died, and you just buried them, don't go home, go somewhere else, because you don't want the spirits to follow you.
Right.
Or even when the casket is being put in a hearse or wherever they're being transported from, especially children would walk underneath the coffin, right, as a form of don't follow me. And even, and like I mentioned, in the South part of one of the practices in the Muslim tradition is you have to bury them 24 hours after they died. So shrouded and buried, whatever the final disposition may be. So there are all these beautiful, sacred way of honoring our loved ones. And in honoring their loved ones, we're also honoring our community and our culture, pre-colonization, and like I said, this is something that we've just forgotten to do, that somebody like Minda and myself can support you through that. And this is really harping back on my point earlier around the needed diversity in this work, because it's so much, there's so much richness that's that we just don't get to have because we're not in the work, at least as much as I wish we are. And we do this as a community, and we can continue to do this as a community. And so I think that's what Minda and I are hoping to really support this work with, wherever we are on the East Coast and West Coast. But
Amen.
Thanks.
Yes. I, for one, would love to have Michelle lead a whole workshop on all of these Philippine traditions that I am not familiar with. I know just a little bit. And I'm sure like many people out there may not be familiar with these pre-colonial practices, and how might we reclaim some of them? What makes sense for us today, and how might we, incorporate this into our practices? And so one practice that I'm familiar with that I hope we don't lose, at least in the in the Christian or Catholic traditions, is this gatherings the 9 days after someone dies. And Jewish people do this in a Shiva, and they do it for 7 days after someone dies. And I think other traditions also do this. Gather with the family, surround them, bring them food, do prayers, chants, singing, sitting with folks, whatever that means. But it's like this regular gathering, like the 9 days or immediately afterwards, because I think people really need it, even though they don't ask for it. What I love about Filipinos is that there's an assumption. Someone dies, we need to come to you, right? And I'm like, can that always be our impulse? It's not the impulse of a lot of people. You see other Americans, and they don't know what to do when someone dies, and they're waiting for the family to say something. And they're just kind of like, oh, when's the funeral? Filipinos don't do that. They just go like, I'm in your, when's the novena? When are we gathering? And then they come with their food. That's how we should react. Someone dies. Someone's having a hard thing. I come with my empanadas, okay? And I'm showing up. And can we just do that for each other? Can we just not forget that that's how we show up as Filipinos? Someone's having a hard time. Come over and bring food. And then surround the family, and then tell them to like sit down, and then whatever you do, maybe it's praying the rosary, maybe it's like sharing stories, maybe it's cleaning up their house, and just showing up, being together, and knowing that that's what you're supposed to do. Even if you've forgotten the prayers, you don't remember you're not Catholic anymore, and you don't do the rosary, or you don't know the chants exactly, just whatever, do it imperfectly. Show up for each other when someone dies, and don't even ask, just kind of show up, and then ask for forgiveness. Like, I brought you some food, is it a good time for me to sit with you? No? Okay, I'll come back tomorrow. And then show up again and tell other people that, Cheryl's having a hard time. Her mom died, something happened, and then spread it around the community and show up. It's a beautiful thing that Filipinos do. And then, and me being away from like active Filipino community life in Southern California or other, bastions of Filipino community, I see the absence of that where I am, and the loneliness of families. There's something really special that I hope we don't lose as Filipinos. It's just the impulse to gather, and may we remember some of the practices that Michelle is raising up for us. May we remember that we didn't always do it only one way. There's so many ways that we could do it, but may we remember the first thing: show up. Show up. Don't be afraid, even if you don't know what to say. Show up. Bring some lumpia. That's one thing you can do.
Thank you for that, both of you. This is Cheryl coming back in. Michelle, when you were talking about some of the indigenous practices in the Philippines, I was connecting it to our relationship to the land. Because a lot of what people are bringing in, right, when these indigenous practices is our connection to their environment. And that's something that was distinctly surfaced as you were talking about the different traditions regionally, and how whatever was in their surroundings is what was also incorporated in their ceremony. There's so much reverence also held there when we're talking about these pre-colonial and even current, I want to say, traditions, because I want to remind folks that we still have currently indigenous people living in the Philippines. This isn't just how we still currently have Native people living in Turtle Island or the U.S. This is not something of the past, right? These are still indigenous groups that are living amongst us. When you were even playing the bamboo, I was just thinking about, it brought me visually to even the Bibak areas. And Bibak standing for Bontok, Ifugao, Benguet, Apayao, and Kalinga, in that northern area of the Philippines, and how just that sound might be reverberating through the highlands as we're really honoring an individual and their passing, and just how so much of the environment is brought into the ceremony. But I've also even think about recent family members that have passed, and we talk about novena. I know in the Philippines, my dad, before his transition, he was saying, make sure that you connect with your relatives, and whenever there's someone that passes, make sure you're offering them to buy flowers or offer them like money, right, to make sure that they're supported in that process. And him telling me stories of how even there's processions that go through his town before that body is transferred into someone's house. And even, afterwards, there's even the talk of if a moth comes and visits your room, right? That's part of the tradition of that loved one being there to visit you. So there's so much of this being talked about within our culture and our community, and so much meaning behind that. So I thank you for just adding to some of the things that I've mentioned and some of the traditions that we honor throughout our diaspora.
Yeah, and just a note on that, Cheryl. Thank you for bringing this connection to the environment and land. For sure, there are some of our practices embody that. I also want to say that, I think pre-colonial, and you're right, to this day, although it's not as prevalent, we have, and not just for Filipinos, but I think for many of us, we've lost touch with the fact that the veil used to be very thin. So not only connection to land, so from below to above, and that's why we see some of these offerings like likha, and the way that we practice is to guide them in the afterlife. So as much as we honor earth and what is below, we also honor what's above, or the cosmos, or wherever else you feel the afterlife may be. And we stand in between all that as mortal beings. So it's there's so many beautiful ways that we honor both the land and the spirit.
Yeah, no, thank you. Now let's talk more about you both in this work are working with different communities, and And Michelle, you're the founder of the Death Workers Alliance, right? A space dedicated to supporting BIPOC death doulas and serving marginalized communities. So tell us more about this space and what type of support you provide that's unique to what you mentioned earlier, supporting BIPOC death doulas who are serving these marginalized communities.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to be granted a vocal fellowship last year, and my project was around building this coalition, and in that space, providing support by way of education, by way of networking, trainings, and really to gather as a community and to elevate voices and practices that we've forgotten or are not as well known. And there's also a danger of having these practices being co-opted, right? I mean, so for me, really making sure that I am holding that space to allow for these voices and practices to stay in their communities. Eventually, you know, as sad as it may seem, I don't want a job in the future, because for me, not to exist mean, for example, that families and communities have relearned how to do some of these things on their own, that they no longer need a death midwife. That's like, yeah, we now remember, and now we can do this. And so the Death Workers Alliance is that network and support for people of color, and also supporting the other marginalized communities to unhouse the LGBTQIA communities, and also the disabled communities, because we often don't include their voices in the end of life planning. And that's completely different episodes, because I can go so much more in depth into what that looks like and what it needs to look like for a lot of our community folks out there who are excluded from a lot of these practices. And so that's the work that I'm currently engaged in as part of the fellowship.
Awesome. You also were a part of the Death Cafe, and in addition to your pediatric hospice work, you also worked in prisons. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the Death Cafe, and maybe some gems that came out of these varying experiences that you've had and encountered as a death midwife?
Yeah, death cafes. I know Minda is very familiar with this. It's one of another entry point into this work and into this community. Death cafes are just started to gather. It's like a meetup, and to talk about. It's unstructured, and no one's really facilitating or leading it. So it's just holding that space for people to come and talk about something that's really hard to talk about or tabooed. The expansion of the work that I'd like to do in the next couple of years is, in addition to being engaging in some of the changing political and practical landscape in California around, for example, human composting. One of the things I really want to engage in is training incarcerated people on how to be there for each other at the end of life. Another episode, but part of the work that I do is I work inside prisons, and so that's just part of my abolitionist work. But to be able to do that for each other in prison, it's important for me. Again, the work is reaching marginalized communities and to elevate voices, and to be inclusive of so many experiences, not just the mainstream that we normally see.
Mm. Thank you. We're happy to do a part 2. I know there's so much to unpack on this topic. Minda, you also mentioned that you're an altar builder, community weaver, a founding member of the Doula Guild, and your village doulas. Tell us more about your work in the Boston area.
Right. Like Michelle, I envision a world where professional death doulas don't need to exist, because people have these skills of taking care of their own at home, and the doula skills are embedded in our families and communities. We're not there yet. Right now, there is a role for professional doulas, because we've been so disconnected from death, and we've been so outsourced it so much. And so we do have a need for professional doulas right now. What I'm trying to do is support those who are interested and called to do this work and to do it professionally and to help them establish themselves and their businesses and their practices, and doing it and connecting with each other through a professional network, a regional professional network called the Doula Guild in Massachusetts. And so supporting relatively new doulas coming out of a lot of these doula training programs, helping them to connect, establish their practice, support each other, provide professional development opportunities, and also client support, so that, you know, if someone has a client that they need care for a long period of time, or they need backup support, there are other doulas that can come and support. That's the Doula Guild. And Your Village Doulas is a practice, a collective of doulas based in Jamaica Plain, the neighborhood of Boston, working together to provide direct end-of-life planning and doula services for folks in the Boston area. As part of the Doula Guild is helping doulas to organize into pods or groups to help them establish themselves. And typically doulas work on their own, and we're trying to help people organize to collectively so that they can provide a more holistic set of services for their communities, and to create a more viable business. So my background is in business. I have an MBA from Boston University, and I'm trying to bring those skills, that the business and infrastructure support for doulas, so that they can establish their practices in the greater Boston area.
Very cool. So this is Sheena coming back in with a question for our co-host Cheryl, actually. Cheryl, I believe you worked with Michelle when your own father was approaching his end-of-life journey. Can you share more about the value and peace that Michelle brought to you during that experience? And, you know, what are some of the gems that came forth from that period of time?
Whew. Michelle, this is my opportunity to publicly give you your roses for that work. Geez. So what many people might know, and I don't know if I'm going to get emotional, but what many people might not know is I know Michelle on a personal level through her younger sister, Anna, who is my age, and we grew up together in our hometown. And I also intersected with Michelle during my short time interning for the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, while Michelle was working at Search to Involve Filipino Americans. And when my dad was sick and getting close, when he was dying, right, and getting close to his transition, you know, I was really, as a social worker, looking for resources, right? That's kind of the strength of social work, is trying to figure out what resources can I bring in to support my dad, and also really to support my own just entering this stage and not knowing how to navigate all of this emotionally and logistically. And so luckily I had a conversation with Michelle's sister Anna and said, hey, you should really talk to my sister Michelle, who does this type of work. Maybe she might be able to help you out. And at that time, when I saw Anna at this party we were at, I had no idea that Michelle had transitioned into this work, right? And so, I definitely, it was such a thorough experience just sitting down with Michelle, and the comfort that she brought in having me really think about all these different components. I had no idea that there were like packets to even bring my dad through. I think we were going through the Sacred Crossing packet, right, Michelle? And all these questions to honor my dad's legacy while he was still around. And just things about, what do you want to wear when you are, when you've passed? Or, what are, some ways that I can support you in the hospital medically, making sure that we have your advance directive in, going through my father's family tree, bringing in like photo albums and having him say, who are all these people in these photos? Because those were pieces of knowledge that I wouldn't have available to me once he transitions, right? Even from recording my dad, asking him questions. What do you want to say to people in our family when you go? Writing those letters to each member of our nuclear family and making sure that that was available. That was like, oh gosh, that was such a important and significant moment that I would have never thought of these things, just because the experience itself is so emotional. I was really close to my father, and so I didn't even like always have the brain capacity to even think about these details, right? Or even like think about, what do I do in these stages? Because all I was focused on is what even like medication to give him and dosage. And I didn't know that there could be like sacredness in this space. And those gems were so valuable, you know, Michelle, because even having, I remember sitting in a circle with yourself and your mother-in-law, right? With other people that were grieving, and just even having that space, that therapeutic space to navigate the emotions and the pain of losing someone so close to me was just, I you know, like, I can't even repay you for all of that, right? Because it's going to be forever etched in my mind. And it made me even really think about, how can I honor myself properly and make sure my loved ones are prepared when it comes to my own transition. And so, you know, to all the details, one thing that really stuck with me was, Michelle had mentioned to me, the last sense to go when someone is passing is hearing. So you can still talk to your dad, you know, after he's taken his last breath. And I feel like having a death midwife like Michelle, like, support me in that process was really even integral, because I was the one by his side when my dad took his last breath. And I brought in all that strength that Michelle like had given to me, you know, and in being able to know what to say with so much strength and reverence, to even know what to do when he took his last breath. And to even know that I could still continue to talk to him and say important things that I wanted him to hear in that transition was so profound. And so I can't advocate enough for having a death doula or a death midwife to help you with the people in your life, your loved ones. It's part of this world of wellness that we're creating. And I thank Michelle and Minda for being on the podcast to be able to offer that to our larger diaspora.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing. Yeah, I still remember our conversation. And from what I remember, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was even around during COVID. So there was that added challenge of how do you support somebody when you can't be physically there, in some of my experience. But I just want to point out that, you know, for many of us and some of our listeners who've experienced end of life, their loved ones dying, grief and loss can feel very stuck in your body. It's hard to move physically, emotionally, spiritually. There's no word to describe just where you are in the dimension of time and space. There is no time and there is no space with such a profound loss. And the work that Minda and I are hoping to really support is how to move through that. And so moving through that so you can be present for yourself and for your loved ones. So a lot of these activities and paperwork and rituals and ceremonies is really an exercise on being with each other at the end of life. So thank you, Cheryl, for sharing. It was such a pleasure to work with you through that.
Yeah, I mean, from that experience too, that's why I wanted to bring you onto this podcast, because you and Minda, you as well, because, you know, like I didn't know that we could be supported in this stage. And, you know, with grieving, you know, even this is like in 2020 that my dad had transitioned, right? And we are now in 2024 and I'm still feeling the emotion of it. So I can't endorse the work that you do enough for our community to just say you don't have to, like what Minda mentioned, you don't have to move through this alone or you can have that support to help you think about these details when you're moving through it emotionally and you're moving through it logistically and you're exhausted and and you don't have the brain space to even think about how to honor your loved one. There are people out there to help you with this work.
It doesn't have to be so lonely. And I forgot to say, that's a big reason why I'm in this work. You shouldn't have to do this alone. It shouldn't. You should break down. You should be wrecked by death and the loss of a loved one. That is natural, and that is just what's supposed to happen. And other people are supposed to help you, to allow you to be wrecked on schedule and to care for you and to support you when your brain's not working, because your brain's not supposed to be working. You're supposed to be grieving. And of course, some people are hyper-focused when they grieve. So it's another way. I just want to honor that too. Some people are very tasky and they're hyper functional because they need to. Okay. So yes, not everyone fully breaks down and cries and all of it is valid, but you don't have to do it alone. And so that's a big reason why I'm here, because I don't believe how we do death in our modern ways, which is individual and private, and everyone steps away and says, I don't know what to do, so I'll just wait for them to tell me what to do. And it shouldn't have to be that way. We should have relationships where we know, okay, I activate, it's my doula time. We've had conversations in the past, and now let's execute this plan. Or people in the community, ideally, you'd have a village around you with not necessarily professionally trained, paid doulas. You'd have people around you who have training or who've just done the work and know, it's her time. And then they come and support you and they wrap you in care. And they know what to do because they've done it before, because they've laid their family members to rest or their loved ones. And we have done this together, right? May we remember how to do this, because we've done it. We did it before. In our modern times, we've forgotten. And can we remember how to care for each other? And I think that's what Michelle and I are trying to bring back. Let's bring back community care, because what we're doing is what we've always done, and what our people have always done. And now it's just now we have to remember and get training on it. But it should be natural, and may we train each other just by showing up, being present, being willing to have conversations, be willing to get closer to suffering, be willing to sit with the suffering, be willing to bear compassion, provide compassionate witness for each other and for ourselves, right? And to allow ourselves to receive care, to not be strong and to, be independent. No, to break down and receive and allow people to show up as the humans that they are. When we break down and we, do what we need to do to be wrecked, and we do this, we uplift other people and we forget, our independent-minded, individualistic, pull myself up by my bootstraps, total myth or lie, has made us forget that what we're supposed to be doing. I mean, I don't like to use those supposed, but what our natural inclination is to connect when we're at these sacred moments, and the doing of the receiving of care is part of the sacred process, right? To submit yourself to death, to submit yourself to care, for other people to care for you, for other people to break down and submit themselves to care. And it puts us in relationship with each other and with the land. And it helps us remember culture. It helps us remember who we are, all of it. We're not meant to do this alone. And death is a teacher for us that we need each other. And so, it's a beautiful story, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing your tenderness and this connection to Michelle, and how, and that beauty and that life-affirming beauty that was made in your relationship with each other and in the care of your dad. just gorgeous.
I mean, I think that's why the work that you both do is so invaluable, right? Because at its very core, you show up in all the different ways that they need you to, whether that means paying bills or just sitting there with them. You show up in all the ways that we don't even need, which is why it's just so important what you ladies do, and we're really grateful. But being that we are a health and wellness podcast, we also do like to ask our guests about their personal health and wellness routines or self-care practices. So, Michelle and Minda, how do you find balance in the work that you do? You know, what are some of the self-care practices that you take on to reset, frankly? And, you know, we'd love to learn more about your own wellness routines.
Well, I get a monthly massage. For real, like just somatically, also working with my bodies in, especially when it's a patient where I've anointed and really handled with my own hands. And this is why I have these batok all over me. They're protection pieces, really. And so that's, my batok is actually one way of caring for myself as a protection. Again, somatically, just getting massages. And as a practicing Zen Buddhist, there's a lot of meditation that go into the work that I do as part of my self-care. And that could mean going, in fact, I just came back from a monastic experience down from the Tassajara Zen Center where I kind of just lived with the monks for a little bit to really reground myself and remind myself, because, we can easily get lost with all of the things as a mom and as a partner and as a community member. There's a lot of these things that, and really needing to reset my just head, heart, and hands. So those are the things that I do. But yeah, how about you, Minda? What's your self-care routine?
A lot of my self-care routine is connecting with good people like you, Michelle. Just being in community with folks, just not being alone, reaching out and like telling people what's heavy in my heart, having a regular practice of sharing and just naming the people that I'm helping, naming the people that I'm holding, naming the people that I'm grieving. And when I'm grieving, and I just want to echo what Michelle said, the grieving of the bigger Ds, bigger deaths of culture, of language, of the loss of ancestry, the forgetting of practices. I grieve that too. And I grieve, there's larger things, the climate, and having other people where I could share this with, and connecting with other people and allowing them to hold my grief with me. That's part of my self-care. And my care for other people is just creating spaces for us to bear witness to what is really happening to us and what we're carrying in our body and where is it in my body. And so part of my practice is just naming my feelings and like understanding where I'm carrying things and honoring that and letting it go, naming it regularly, making little altars to name it and to put things down, to have just like physical practices of putting things down and honoring them, elevating them and honoring them, bringing it outside of my body. And so in altar making, I'm getting into more of a practice of outdoor altars wherever I am in nature, like on the beach, and collecting rocks and shells and creating a temporary altar to honor the place that I'm in and to be present with the place and to honor beauty and to nature and whatever I'm carrying and to set it down and to let it be washed away by the elements, and to be watered and to recognize that everything is temporary and that life is fragile and things pass. So those are some of my self-care practices. Breathing helps too.
This is Cheryl coming back in for our closing. As we begin to close, how can our community reach you both if they have additional questions? I know, Michelle and Minda, you have something planned that's coming up for December 1st. So we'll start with maybe Michelle, how can our community reach you if they have additional questions? And then if you want to make your announcement here, And then Minda, to follow with also how can our community reach you?
Yeah, thank you. I don't engage with social media often, or really rarely. I don't have any handles or any of that. But you can just reach me via deathworkersalliance.org. You'll find more information about the alliance itself if you want to get involved. But I also want to share an exciting opportunity that Minda and I are providing for your listeners, exclusive to the Philippinx Wellness listeners. And that's on December 1st, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard and 5 p.m. Eastern Standard, where Minda and I will host like an Ask a Doula Q&A platform for all of y'all for any questions you may have. But more importantly is to provide a picture of some of what you might want to think about in planning for this end-of-life binder or files, and to just get us started as a community. So again, that's on December 1st.
And Minda, how can folks also contact you if they have any questions or would like to reach you?
You can reach me. You can find me at yourvillagedoulas.com. Yeah, yourvillagedoulas.com. And you can contact me there and find my email there as well.
Okay. Final words. Is there anything else that either of you would want our community throughout the diaspora to know when it comes to this topic of dying with dignity?
Well, I'm really grateful that dying with dignity is included in a conversation of wellness, because this is really very much about living well until your last breath. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this, to bring death and dying into the wellness conversation. And salamat. It's wonderful to be with you all.
Well, thank you both again, Michelle and Minda, for really teaching us what it means to die with dignity. We look forward to supporting your journeys as you continue to offer aid, healing, and inner peace to those who are fortunate enough to work with you. And we'll make sure to continue sharing your upcoming opportunities as we stay connected in partnership. And for our community, for our next episode, we will be talking to lead functional medicine physician of Love.Life, Dr. Jaclyn Tolentino, about Hormonal Health 101. Stay tuned for the launch of that episode on Wellness Wednesday, December 11th.
Michelle, did you also have any final words that you'd like to add as we close this episode?
This should be titled Living with Dignity, because like Minda was mentioning, this is all about day-to-day life, every moment, being awake to every moment of our life. And really just, that's what it should be called. But maraming salamat to all of our listeners who stayed listening through this episode, and hopefully that we were able to impart some useful information to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. As we close, we'd like to acknowledge once again our guest speakers, Michelle Mondia and Minda Sanchez, our graphic designer and producer for our opening and closing track, Ritchie, our advisors, Allison De La Cruz, who sent Minda our way. Thanks, Allison. Rian de los Reyes and Safo Teologo, our community partners, SoCal Filipinos, as Filipino American Life, Rising Filipinas, Therapy Nai, and all of our community members for your shares and support. As always, we'll share more about our guests' offerings on our Instagram stories, including their December 1st event. So check our stories and then also our highlights for permanent access with any of their upcoming events. Be sure to follow us at Pilipinx in Wellness on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to continue to hit like and subscribe on our Pilipinx in Wellness YouTube channel. Thank you always for believing in us. Be well, everyone. Continue to take care of yourselves and each other.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing from our audience and our listeners. And good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Maraming salamat.
Salamat gyud kaayo.